Welcome to the Sabbath afternoon study. With it, we begin a new series, 49. We will be describing the truth of the 144,000. Since 1844, Adventists have been fixated on the prophecy pertaining to that glorious assembly of saints described in Revelation chapter 14. The next chapter over, the one that enveloped much of our attention from our last series, Revelation 13. Unfortunately, Adventists have established their views of that body of saints not on Bible analysis, but on conjecture and speculation. Today, April the 1st, 2023, with this study, the mustard seed gives correct Bible theology to dash their errors. How appropriate it is, then, that today is April Fool's Day. For now, we shall examine the folly of their presumptions that they may be exposed to the world. Such is my, quote, likening, close quote, of them to be foolish men. This may sound overly judgmental and defamatory, even unchristian, until you realize that Christ himself forewarned us of this day of reckoning. While hidden upon and while speaking through Jesus, he said, and I quote from Matthew 7, "Therefore, whosoever heareth these sayings of mine and doeth them not shall be likened unto a foolish man, which built his house upon the sand. And great shall be the fall of that house." Matthew chapter 7, verses 24, 26 through 27. Whoa. I think somebody out there must have missed it. Somebody wasn't paying careful attention to every word that proceeded out of the mouth of God. It says a great fall is in store for them. Let's ponder upon that term to realize only a towering and humongous house can have a great fall. How appropriate is it then that on this day, April the 1st, 2023, from Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania, United States of America, the Lord has given to us the opportunity to see this fall and expose the fools who rule it. All Adventists, whether they be nominal or Davidian at all, had they heeded the wisdom given to them in their historic literature, could have precluded that derogatory title. This I say because E.G. White warned them against speculating to decipher the identity of the 144,000. Isn't it foolish for Adventists, even Davidian Adventists, to claim to have established their faith on the writings of E.G. White, while they simultaneously ignore her often cited counsel on this matter? In 1904, she said, and I quote, "Christ says that there will be those in the church who will present fables and suppositions when God has given grand, elevating, ennobling truths which should ever be kept in the treasure house of the mind." When men pick up this theory and that theory, when they are curious to know something it is not necessary for them to know, God is not leading them. It is not his plan that his people shall present something which they have to suppose, which is not taught in the Word. Let that expression echo in your minds. It is not his will that they shall get into controversy over questions which will not help them spiritually, such as who is to compose the 144,000. This, those who are the elect of God will in a short time know without question. Ellen G. White's One Selected Messages, page 174, carrying over to 175. We shall see that, to use E.G. White's lingo, the elect of God today has newly exposed the Apostle Paul's pre-specifications for enlightenment on Israel. Once received, they will know that, quote, without a doubt, To further use her parlance, Emmanuel, the faithful wise steward who feeds meat in due season, is to leave Zion so as to teach the elect of God. And it shall be a teaching that will be revealed not through speculation, but by the word of God. With this finding, I reveal the title of our series. It is, quote, "The 144,000 is real." Some may have noted a double entendre of the phrase "is real" to show that Israel is not an icon. They are real. This series has a title, and its theme will be discussed over several studies. But for the specific title of this, its first study, the appropriate cadence of accentuation mandates that I give the title further on downstream. As we thereto journey, let us not be swindled doctrinally by those who fallaciously claim that the 144,000 are not real Israel. True. Revelation is a book that is replete with symbols. But understand, its symbols can be tied to real and literal subjects or predicates. Let me give you an example of Jesus. He promised to us in Matthew an illustration that will help us. He said, a wise man was to build his house upon a rock. Such does not infer that because the rock or the house is a metaphor, that the expression wise man is equally illusory and surreal. The key to understanding Revelation is to unravel the symbolic and the literal Bible evidence. I was studying some equations of algebra on YouTube, and we came across quadratic equations. And I remember I was really good in Algebra 2 and factoring quadratic equations. But if you want to know who the 144,000 is, you have a quadratic equation, so to speak, that has to be explained. You just can't. So it would be, let's say, 6x squared minus 4x plus 3, just to give an example, equals the 144,000. You just can't read the names and think that you have garnered meaning. It's something that has to be taught to you. The number 144,000 represents a real collection of saints. Yet consistency of symbolic analysis is verified by the use of metaphors to define them. If their number was not intended to be received literally, then John would have perhaps said, I saw sheep standing on Mount Zion. This would compel the blessed teacher to analyze or interpret the symbol to pervade the actual meaning. Perhaps such a strong meat teacher, a master of the first principles of the oracles of God, one who has revisited the preliminary storyline of Israel from Genesis, and one who uses Bible analysis to interpret symbolism, would then go on to explain that Israel is the Lord's sheep, and they have descended from Jacob. When referring to the great multitude of Gentiles from all nations, cows would be the symbolic expression. In fact, this very deployment of idiomatic parlance is found in Leviticus when it describes the atonement, and also in Ezekiel 34. Therein, the literal number 144,000 is not cited. This is not to say that the number 144,000 is not an intricate subject, for it is a subject that requires this very series to explain. And so it should be, for as shown already from Micah 6, the Lord's new marching orders are that we must arise, contend before the mountains, and let the hills hear thy voice. Why, Lord? Because the Lord has a controversy with his people, and he will plead with Israel. Therefore, you have to identify Israel. That text is found in Micah chapter 6, verses 1 and 2. I have anticipated even deeper meaning than we have been shown beforehand to identify the mountains expressed in Micah 6 before whom we are to contend. But for now, please note that a controversy exists with God's church by their refusal to abandon yesterday's foolish teachings. For this reason, he turns his hand to Israel, the 144,000. They shall then honor his word by becoming the first to learn the knowledge of God. After all, it says, the Lamb's Father's name is written in the foreheads of the 144,000. We must cut through the thick layers of Seventh-day Adventist speculation. They presume that this expression means that they have the character of God. How trite, superficial, and cliched is their theology. In fact, this assertion repudiates God, since by his command did Christ reveal that no one knows of his character. The Bible says, quote, all things are delivered to me of my Father, and no man knoweth who the Son is, but the Father, and who the Father is, but the Son, and somebody else, and he to whom the Son will reveal. Luke chapter 10, verse 22. The truth of the symbolism to receive Father's name in the forehead means to learn of Christ's Father and to learn it from the singular man to whom Christ promised to reveal it. Certain and sure is this finding, because Christ recommended to all who are to be saved, both sheep or cattle, that they must seek after the doctrine, not from Jesus Christ, but from another teacher. More precisely, he said, and I quote from John 6, ye seek me, referring to Jesus Christ, but labor not for the meat which perisheth, but for that meat which endureth unto everlasting life, which another man, but for that meat which endureth unto everlasting life, which the Son of Man shall give unto you. For him hath God the Father sealed. John chapter 6, verse 26 and 27. You wouldn't think that God the Father would need to seal Christ or Jesus, but this other individual has to receive the seal. Failing to grapple with this testimony of Jesus' commandment, he says, labor not for that meat. We can see the reason why God is to liken his church as unto foolish men. It is because they, being connected to Zion, the highest house of God in earth's history, profess to believe in the work of E.G. White and in the Bible, yet as they hypocritically present themselves in the garb of his clergy, they make the Bible an unopened book in their hands. They cannot divorce themselves from their inherited and presumptuous ideas of yesterday. This inability to perceive new Bible light is what God calls a stiff neck. God, in the first principles of his oracles, told Abraham, and I quote, this is my covenant. Every man-child among you shall be circumcised. And my covenant shall be in your flesh for an everlasting covenant. And the uncircumcised man-child whose flesh of his foreskin is not circumcised, that soul shall be cut off. Cut off. Good thing that we are being retaught the first principles, for this has an echoing coefficient to be reverberated downstream. And the uncircumcised man-child whose flesh of his foreskin is not circumcised, that soul shall be cut off from his people. He hath broken my covenant. Genesis chapter 17, verse 10 through 12. Is it not folly for the church to preach that the kingdom of heaven is at hand? That Jesus Christ is about to return? That his kingdom is about to be established without first teaching the commensurate symbolic meaning of circumcision? That all must cut away their cherished doctrines of yesterday so that they may enter into the proverbial bosom of Abraham, also known as into the kingdom. This emphasis Moses did so teach when he showed the full panorama of theological duty by marrying Genesis, the first oracles, to those that were purveyed in his day some 200 years later, after Israel left Egypt. He thereby canonized into the law not just the requisite of genital circumcision, but the concept of heart circumcision. He said to Israel, quote, "What doth the Lord thy God require of thee?" Isn't that an interesting question? Everybody wants to know, what is God? What is it with God? What does he want? Well, Moses gives you the answer. What doth the Lord require of thee? But to circumcise the foreskin of your heart and be no more stiff-necked. Deuteronomy chapter 10, verses 12 through 16. This conclusion gives clarity to E.G. White's 1904 prohibition against speculation about the 144,000. God well knew that today, some 180 years later, when he is ready to advance them in the truth, humanity, after settling on the errant conclusion, would have, out of pride, refused to change to receive the truth. Thus, he gave to us the law of changing theology, of removing the foreskin of the heart. By the way, heart circumcision is mandated for both males and females, since both can cut away yesterday's cherished doctrines. One keystone, albeit unperceived, doctrine with little intense study is that the 144,000 are to stand on Mount Zion. And that stand is indeed symbolic, because we know that literal Mount Zion was in Jerusalem. Davidius, since 1935, thereby taught that the 144,000, by virtue of this prophesied stand, was to return to the literal place. Traditional Adventists had another theme, which created friction between them and Davidia. Traditional Adventists teach that Mount Zion is in heaven. Both hypocritically failed to doctrinally account for symbolism. The mustard seed Advent, in its path to the seal, has historically taught both of these doctrines yesterday. Then, one day he, by flexing his neck, underwent the trauma of heart circumcision. Now, by careful Bible study, the mustard seed Advent proves that to stand on Mount Zion is to unite with the church triumphant and become converted to the law and the testimony. It is to labor together with David and to seek entry into his seventh-day rest. This shall occur when he, the deliverer, leaves Zion, the Seventh-day Adventist church, as so expressed by Paul, that he may turn away ungodliness from Jacob. Paul said to the Gentiles, "Be not high-minded, for God is able to graft Israel in again." This affirms our series title, "It Makes Israel Real." No Christian in this Gentile epic should dare to deny the Comforter's purveyance of this theme through Paul. To so do is a shortened script to victory in Naaman's 7 dips in Jordan. Remember, we spent some time discussing that. It's our cure for sin. Paul said, and I quote, "For I speak to you Gentiles, inasmuch as I am the apostle of the Gentiles. If the first fruits be holy, the lump is also holy. And if the root be holy, so are the branches. Because of unbelief, Israel was broken off. And thou standest by faith. Be not high-minded, but fear. For if God spared not the natural branches, take heed lest he also spare not thee. Behold, therefore, the goodness and severity of God. On them which fell, severity, but toward thee goodness, if thou continue in his goodness. Otherwise thou also shalt be cut off. Cut off. I told you that this expression has an echoed coefficient. And they also, if they abide not still in unbelief, speaking of Israel, shall be grafted in. For God is able to graft them in again. Romans chapter 11, verses 13 and 16, 20 through 23. Abraham is the root as shown in Genesis, and the Gentiles were grafted in after Israel was broken off. Therefore, if charitable words of Christian benevolence for Adventists are in order, the mustard seed concedes the veracity of the Adventist historic claim to be spiritual Israel by Pauline validation. They, by grafting, were included into the bosom of Abraham. Yet, this accommodation makes the law of circumcision to be applicable both to them and to Israel. It does with a key caveat. They must heed Paul's above mandate to, quote, be not high-minded. But the salient lesson is that during the age of Christianity, the real genetic people called Israel are distinguished from the Gentiles, and Paul's ministry was directed exclusively not to them, but to the Gentiles. It was directed away from real Israel. Thus, although the Gentile church rightfully claims a share of the Abrahamic kingdom, so long as they continue in his goodness, still the 144,000, the seed of Jacob being broken off yesterday, does not share the same destiny with the Gentiles. The two groups are mutually exclusive. This is why the Redeemer must leave Zion to turn Israel from ungodliness, that they may be grafted in again. In fact, to be grafted in again is another way to symbolically say the 144,000 shall stand on Mount Zion. Paul continues to meticulously define this dichotomy by saying that one group, Israel, is made enemies to the other, the grafted in Gentiles. He says, continuing in Romans 11, for if thou wert cut out of the olive tree which is wild by nature, and wert grafted contrary to nature into a good olive tree, how much more shall these, which be the natural branches, be grafted into their own olive tree? For I would not, brethren, that ye should be ignorant of this mystery, lest ye should be wise in your own conceits. That blindness in part has happened to Israel until the fullness of the Gentiles be come in. And so all Israel shall be saved. Then he points back to the scriptures. As it is written, there shall come out of Zion the deliverer, and shall turn away ungodliness from Jacob. Then he says something very salient. For this is my covenant unto them, when I shall take away their sins. As concerning the gospel, they are enemies for your sakes. But as touching the election, they are beloved for the Father's sakes. Romans chapter 11, 24 through 28. Special emphasis. Since this text proves that the deliverer leaves a place called Zion to reconsecrate Israel, and does so by a covenant agreement, then Israel's reconstitution as first fruits explains the revelation promise that they are to stand on Mount Zion with the Lamb's Father's name in their forehead. And according to Paul, they are the, quote, beloved elect for the Father's sakes. Zion, consequently, it can be said to be the designated Gentile church that is to reveal the identity of Father, and do so first to the 144,000. And to boot, Zion can positively be identified to be coded speech to describe the Seventh-day Adventist church. Finally, the fruition of the blessing to Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, after nearly 3,700 years, shall be made real today. And the actual historic site and the historic function of literal Mount Zion amplifies the lesson. Zion was the city of ancient, actual David. And Paul said that Christ limited a certain day in David for the Gentiles, those in the Seventh-day Adventist Church, that they may hear his, David's, voice. Let us extrapolate this finding from the literal account about Zion as expressed in 1 Kings chapter 8. And I quote, "Then Solomon assembled the elders of Israel and all the heads of the tribes in Jerusalem, that they might bring up the ark of the covenant of the Lord out of the city of David, which is Zion. And it came to pass, the glory of the Lord filled the house of the Lord." 1 Kings chapter 8, verses 1, verses 10 and 11. Solomon gathered. I didn't say all of Israel. Doesn't read that way. Only the leaders of all of Israel. Take care to note, it does not say the Jews either, but the elders of all 12 tribes. By parallel analysis, this episode symbolizes the 144,000. Thus are they, not all of Israel, but the elders, called by symbolic speech Jerusalem, when Jesus said, "And they shall fall by the edge of the sword, and shall be led away captive into all nations, and Jerusalem shall be trodden down of the Gentiles until the times of the Gentiles be fulfilled." Luke chapter 21, verse 24. Deeper study will show the plight of the entirety of all Israel. But for now, our focus is only on the 144,000, the men who are to be their elders. We must mark this next point with special emphasis. Solomon's temple of worship, after the years of its tedious erection, could not be blessed until the induction of two distinct components. One, the assembly therein by the elders, and two, the ark of the covenant that was placed therein. Then the glory of the Lord shall fill that house. This phenomenon, the elders in the temple with the ark, is another portrayal of the 144,000 standing on Mount Zion. The elders, it should be emphasized, are not all Israel either. They are Jacob's duodecimo, which includes his sons from the house of Reuben, and then Simeon and Levi, and yes, his fourth son, Judah, then Zebulun and Issachar, and Dan, and Joseph and Benjamin, and Naphtali, and Gad and Asher. I keep having to repeat all the names because I want to familiarize the people of the totality of the children of Israel. Also, another finding is key. By Moses, the ark was to contain both the law and the testimony. Pointing to the fruition of this ethic, Isaiah 8 tells us, "Bind up the testimony and seal the law among my disciples. And I will wait upon the Lord that hideth his face from the house of Jacob." I feel special reverberation in this phrase also. That hideth his face from the house of Jacob. To the law, to the testimony, if they speak not according to this word, it is because there is no light in them. Isaiah chapter 8, verses 16 and 17 and verse 20. Do any dare doubt the conclusion that must be heralded now? That Zion is the symbol of the church which, in her history, has championed the honor of the law and the testimony. There is no other organization today that, within her confines, both the law and the testimony are exalted other than the home of the mustard seed Advent, the Seventh-day Adventist Church. All others either misquote Paul to claim freedom from the law, or they reject the separate identity of Father, Christ, and Jesus in favor of Emperor Constantine's doctrine of triunity, which describes a God with a split personality, a theme that directly defies the testimony of Jesus. Therefore, in their art, they don't have the testimony. For that reason and many others as well. In fact, his testimony clearly states, let's count the personalities to see if you can reject it or accept it. From John 14, but the Comforter, which is the Holy Ghost, whom the Father will send in my name, he shall teach you all things and bring all things to your remembrance whatsoever I have said unto you. The things which Christ said to the disciples are found in the testimony of Jesus. Thus, unless a man can count these three personalities promised by God to minister to us, they still cannot be credited with respect for either the law or the testimony. They cannot be the instrument to cause the 144,000 to stand on Mount Zion, and they cannot reveal the identity, the name of the Lamb's Father, to be installed in the foreheads of real Israel. They have been told to watch for the hour of my emergence as the thief, even still. After my 42 years of this fruition, they have rejected this evidence in favor of their historic theological folly. The foolishness which Christ promised shall be relegated to them for failing to believe after the hearing of his word. Thus today, by this study to now be heard, are the nations to learn that God has a controversy with his people and will plead with Israel. Man cannot be a true Christian unless he unites the law and the testimony so as to redeem Israel. Did not Christ say, quote, for had ye believed Moses, ye would have believed me, for he wrote of me. But if you believe not his writings, how shall you believe my words? In John chapter 5, verse 46 and 47. Ergo today, we can fully see God's controversy with the Seventh-day Adventist Church. To proceed, I cite to you again Micah chapter 6. It says, hear ye, O mountains, the Lord's controversy, and ye strong foundations of the earth. For the Lord hath a controversy with his people, and he will plead with Israel. Micah chapter 6, verse 2. Clear it is now to see we are pointed to a time during the controversy with his church, but before he, Christ, begins to plead with Israel. Beforehand, as so stated, he has hid his face from them. And thus does Revelation 14 say, and I quote, and I heard a voice from heaven, and they sung as it were a new song before the throne, and before the four beasts, and the elders, and no man could learn that song but the 144,000. These were redeemed from among men, being the first fruits unto God and to the Lamb. Revelation chapter 14, verses 2 through 4. Take care to note, it says that none could learn but the 144,000. This manifests that Israel does not know the song until they learn it. By the way, we've reached the perfect segue to reveal the title of this study, 49.1. It is, and I quote, Israel's new song, close quote. It comes today, the day when Adventism is indicted for their stiff necks, their refusal to adjust their theology by flexing their views. So failing, they are in violation of Paul's mandate, which requires that Gentiles must stand by faith so they may continue to abide in God's goodness. In this, their refusal of circumcision, they are cut off from Abraham's house. but Israel is to be grafted in again. The severity of God toward them is over, and God must now identify them to the world and explain the reason for their suffrage. This shall occur in the year of their redemption. Accordingly, we are told that they, the 144,000, sing a new song. Since critics, by use of the well-refuted falsity that Jacob's son Dan is not listed among the 144,000, and since they also seek to invalidate the 144,000 by claiming their literal number is not real, now is the time to expose their pretentious honor of symbolism. Israel's new song is not an actual Christmas cantata. Instead, it is a symbolic tribute. They sing to God by lyrical harmony to praise him even in the face of their affliction. Slaves were renowned in this regard. Thus, the new song describes the joy which comes at the end of their suffering. It is new because it expresses a new joy. None others can learn this song, but why? Because none others have been voluntarily stepped on as have they. And not just stepped on, but you're going to be shocked by this. They have been afflicted by Jesus' Christian gospel emissaries. In other words, Jesus, though he was the focus of their worship, manifested favor to their enemies. Just as Paul so stated, and let me requote to you again, "Behold, therefore, the goodness and severity of God. On Israel which fell severity, but toward thee goodness, if thou continue in his goodness. As concerning the gospel, they are enemies for your sakes, but as touching the election, they are beloved for the Father's sakes." Knowledge to discern between Jesus, Christ, and Father is essential here to understand the singing of a new song. For in their affliction, the Gentiles were exacting in their hatred, leaving African Americans to suffer under the cruelty of not all white people, but of the sworn enemies of the Abraham Lincoln-style liberators. They suffered under the yoke of the Confederacy. Thankfully, the beast who controls America, as described in Revelation 13, has, take care to note with special emphasis, two horns, which means two opposing powers. It says that none others can sing their song except the 144,000, for it expresses their relief from the time of Jacob's trouble. This is what Paul meant by compelling the Gentiles to behold the severity of God. By God, Paul means the severity of the God of the Old Testament, who was Christ, the dove, who later descended to hide upon Jesus at his baptism. Yet Christ's severity occurred under Jesus' watch during the time of the Gentiles, the time after which Christ had given up on Israel. But according to another Bible prophecy, Zechariah 2, it expresses that Jesus is legally absolved from blame. In that text, Zechariah, by use of the pseudonym, the Lord of hosts, says of Jesus that he was not given the assignment to be Israel's protectorate. He says, and I quote, "For thus saith the Lord of hosts." He's quoting Jesus there because he refers to the other entity, the Lord, as Christ, not the Lord of hosts. "For thus saith the Lord of hosts, after the glory hath he, Christ, sent me unto the nations which spoiled you. For he that toucheth you toucheth the apple of not my eye, but someone else's eye. For he that toucheth you toucheth the apple of his eye." Zechariah chapter 2, verse 8. Jacob is defined in Deuteronomy chapter 32 as the apple of Christ's eye. And Israel underwent the severity of God during Jesus' outreach to the Gentiles, the very nations who spoiled. Not the Jews, take care to note, but Israel. So we must ask, why the joyous cantata? Because today, the first time in history, they have been proven to be real Israel. When the prophet Jeremiah explains the time of trouble, he is giving clarity to the message of Revelation 14, which defines the 144,000, and to the new song, the joy that they shall find in their relief. He says, Alas, for that day is great, so that none is like it. It is even the time of Jacob's trouble, but he shall be saved out of it. For it shall come to pass in that day, saith the Lord of hosts, that I will break his yoke from off thy neck, and will burst thy bonds, and the strangers shall no more serve themselves of him. But they shall serve the Lord their God, and David their king, whom I will raise up unto them. Therefore fear thou not, O my servant Jacob, saith the Lord, neither be dismayed, O Israel. For lo, I will save thee from afar, and thy seed from the land of their captivity. And Jacob shall return, and shall be in rest, and be quiet, and none shall make him afraid. Jeremiah chapter 30, verses 7 through 10. But to understand the new song, we must grasp the 3,000 years of controversy under the old song. A song here refers to a shared tribulation. Thus the point deserves regurgitation. To sing a new song implies reversal of fortunes and the abolition of yesterday's tribulation. Or as Paul put it, they have been freed from the severity of God so as to now stand by his goodness. And the Gentiles cannot behold God's severity until this light is conveyed to them. When Israel abandoned their covenant with Christ, it began nearly 3,000 years of suffrage. And all of humanity until now has been either ignorant or unsympathetic to this trouble. The work of Moses elaborates. The Bible says that. And the Lord said unto Moses, Behold, thou shalt sleep with thy fathers, and this people will rise up and go a-whoring after other gods of the strangers of the land, whither they go to be among them, and will forsake me, and break my covenant which I have made with them. Then mine anger shall be kindled against them in that day, and I will forsake them, and will hide my face from them. And they shall be devoured, and many evils and troubles shall befall them, so that they will say in that day, Are not these evils come upon us? Because our God is not among us. And I will surely hide my face in that day for all the evils which they have wrought, and that they are turned unto other gods. Now therefore write ye this song for you, and teach it the children of Israel. Put it in their mouths, that this song may be a witness for me against the children of Israel. And it shall come to pass, when many evils and troubles are befallen them, that this song shall testify against them as a witness. For it shall not be forgotten out of the mouths of their seed. Deuteronomy chapter 31, verse 16 through 19, verse 21. So you see, before the new song is taught, the old song must be re-rendered. And it can never be taught if the deception of the Adventist church prevails. That is the deception that the 144,000 is not real. Ergo, my message is the theme of this series. The 144,000 Israel. To think otherwise is to trumpet the cause that Christ is a covenant breaker. Instead, remember, if Christ, take care to note, I did not say Jesus. Instead, remember, if Christ could fulfill his promise to punish them, then Christ certainly can fulfill his promise to redeem them. Such was part of the fine print of the covenant. He promised, and I quote, And it shall come to pass when all these things are come upon thee, the blessing and the curse, and thou shalt call them to mind among all the nations, and thou shalt return unto the Lord thy God, that the Lord thy God will turn thy captivity and have compassion upon thee, and will return and gather thee from all the nations, and he will do thee good and multiply thee above thy fathers. And the Lord thy God will circumcise thine heart, that thou mayest live. And the Lord thy God will put all these curses upon thine enemies, and on them that hate thee, which persecuted thee. Deuteronomy chapter 30, verses 1 through 8. Clearly, therefore, as Paul so affirms, the deliverer, a singular man, shall leave the stiff-necked and uncircumcised Adventist church, Zion, the heretofore beacon of Protestantism, that he may take away ungodliness from Jacob. In this interlude, shown to be the end of the time of the Gentiles, Paul furthermore promises that the Gentiles would inherit the severity of God, since they, quote, continue not in his goodness, close quote. Picking up the Confederate flag under the leadership of 666, Donald Trump seals them under its curse. Conclusively then, since the gospel purveyors who have been revealed to be the white Anglo-Saxon Protestants are declared by Paul to be Israel's enemies, and since the covenant declared that the curses heaped upon Israel would be placed upon their enemies, then the conclusion is inescapable. The two-horned beast that rules America, not the Abraham Lincoln side, but her conservative horn power, are going to see a reversal of God's goodness. Or as Revelation 13, verse 10, so succinctly put it, quote, he that leadeth into captivity shall go into captivity. We, the mustard seed, can now rejoice because while abiding here in America under the auspices of the two-horned beast, and so doing in peace and calm quietude, we can abide in the prosperity of Emmanuel. Should there be any who doubt, bear in mind, Christ has taken to heaven living witnesses to affirm this 3,500-year saga. They are to attest that Israel is real. This attestation is so done to their other accompanying saints in heaven. They all are beings who formerly abode on earth and who are symbolized as the four beasts and the 24 elders. These beings, other studies have proven, come from a portion of the royalty of every nation throughout Earth's history, so that they may abide not with Jesus, but with Christ in his special abode. Such, you should know, can only be done when this office identifies Israel, as E.G. White affirmed it would do, by Bible analysis. An expert at counting, he, the mustard seed, refutes hell's counterclaim uttered now by the Seventh-day Adventist elders, so as to properly identify the 144,000. Ergo, this voice is heard in heaven, to therein bind this testimony. After all, Peter was promised to bind in heaven that which he binds on earth. Actual Peter was an icon for this, the mustard seed's ministry. Christ, therefore, foreknew that scoffers in violation of E.G. White's counter-admonition would, by their illegal speculations, seek to invalidate Israel's new song that is first sung in heaven this day. Yet the elders on earth, in defiance of Paul's claim, dare to teach that God is not able to graft Israel in again. This is why Revelation, in defining the song of the 144,000, said that it was first sung in heaven. Again it says, and I heard a voice from heaven, as the voice of many waters, and as the voice of a great thunder. And I heard the voice of harpers, harping with their harps. And they sung, as it were, a new song before the throne, and before the four beasts, and before the elders. And no man could learn that song but the 144,000. Take care to note, as the text lingers on your screen, the harpers harped the song while the 144,000 were still in need to learn it, giving us the exact time setting for this message. But logic demands that we answer the question, what is there to learn since the words were given in the Bible by Moses? This could only indicate that the voice heard in heaven, in his holy mountains, does what none others have done. It teaches the true perspective of those words and proves that they apply to the sons of America's former slaves. Note with pensive care, I did not say that it applies to all black people. Look forward to differentiation to come in advanced studies. This application, it does when he, the deliverer, leaves Zion to plead with him. Part of his plea is to affirm that Christ was honorable. Thus, once the special status of the sons of America's former slaves is Bible proven, I encourage you to read Mustard Seed Adventist Book 2.01, entitled Beyond the Rivers of Ethiopia, 1996. They, the harpers, shall put them into their correct tribal bundle. The psalmist David speaks of this when he said, speaking of Christ, his foundation is in the holy mountains. The Lord loveth the gates of Zion more than all the dwellings of Jacob. Glorious things are spoken of thee, O city of God. And of Zion it shall be said, this and that man was born in her. And the highest himself shall establish her. The Lord shall count when he writeth up the people that this man was born there. As well as the singers, as the players on instruments shall be there. Psalms chapter 87, verses 1, verse 5 through 7. This suggests that these translated saints have not been idle. Instead, they have, through the centuries, worked as guardian angels to keep careful records of historic genetic procession. Though only now do they know how to use their senses, how to precisely count Israel. Such is done as shown in study 48.8 by tabulating Jacob's duodecimo, according to the house of their fathers. They learn it today, the day when this, the Lord's voice, is telecommunicated. In other words, is bound in heaven. Accordingly, Moses' historic witnesses, the harpers, have awaited the day when the Son of David should come forth to attach the prophecy of Israel to the then for unidentified people, the 144,000. Armed with this information, they shall attest to each stanza of the song. The first, that Israel rose out of Egypt. Second, they went into the promised land. Third, they violated the covenant and were cast off. And fourth, now by the voice of the mustard seed, their promised years of torment are over. The song cannot be sung without knowing each stanza. According to today, the day when Israel is identified, it is a new song. It is Jacob's salvation from his time of trouble. This is the reason why this light is declared before the mountains. And be it not mistaken, the song of Moses vindicates Christ's severity over Israel. When the Christian world hears Israel, they automatically only think about Jacob's fourth son, Judah, by calling Israel the Jews. Others, like the nominal Adventist ministry, presume that his sons, because they violated the covenant, were eternally lost, and that the names of Jacob's sons extol some abstract ethereal virtue. But how could any Bible believer put faith in their speculative assertions when Moses promised that Israel shall exist in the last day, and because of their corruption would be vexed by evil? Remember, to be a true Christian, you must believe both Moses and Christ. Being that Israel was rebellious until they are converted, only a foolish man would seek to ascribe symbolic virtue to their names. The witnesses cited by Moses were taken so that the virtue shall be ascribed not to Israel only, but to Christ's name. Moses said, "Gather unto me all the elders of your tribes and your officers, that I may speak these words in their ears, and call heaven and earth to record against them. For I know that after my death ye will utterly corrupt yourselves, and evil will befall you in the latter days." And Moses spake in the ears of all the congregation of Israel the words of this song, until they were ended. Deuteronomy chapter 31, verses 28 through 30. The song does not have much rhythm or melody until the harpers put their music to it. It is the song of the Bible, since the entire book chronicles Israel's demise and then their rise. More precisely, the song defines Bible salvation by Israel's miraculous restitution from destitution. But an excellent question now percolates to the surface. If heaven and earth were made to witness, then why is there so much universal ignorance about the 144,000? Or about real Israel? So much so that the mustard seed, the beginning of the kingdom, for Matthew chapter 13, is the only one who can validate them. Moses gives the answer. He says, "Give ear, O ye heavens, and I will speak, and hear, O earth, the words of my mouth. My doctrine shall drop as the rain. My speech shall distill as the dew, as the small rain upon the tender herb, and as the showers upon the grass. Because I will publish the name of the Lord. Ascribe ye greatness unto our God. He is the rock, his work is perfect, for all his ways are judgment. A God of truth and without iniquity. Just and right is he. They have corrupted themselves. Their spot is not the spot of his children." Hope your minds are drawn to the challenge of Naaman. Their spot is not the spot of his children. They are a perverse and crooked generation. Deuteronomy chapter 32, verses 1 through 5. We often cite the tarnish of rebellious children to impeach the parents, but Moses' theme is not so. Israel's corruption, their spot, is not a stain that resulted from any association to Christ. Not to Christ, not even to the white man. But they put the proverbial albatross around their own necks. Such will be the witness of the harpers. This they shall do in the day when heaven and earth shall hear the name of the Lord, his identity. Beforehand, Moses made the record, but like the dew and the rain, it has been distilled. For the morning dew descends upon the earth, but then, even by mid-morning, it evaporates. Is not evaporation the process used in distillation? And this evaporation has left the impression that Christ was unjust unto his own children. So I call you to remember Moses' song. Israel corrupted themselves, and here is the miracle. Only by the severity of Christ could they, and thus the world, be saved. This is the essence of Moses' closing words. Likewise is this the case with the name of the Lord. Moses showed to us Christ's identity. But as is the case with the desert morning dew I cite again, by lunchtime it has already been forgotten. In Deuteronomy 18, he gave God's promise that the Lord would protect the church's sensitive ears by gently speaking to them through a prophet. That prophet we have come to know by Bible evidence is presented by the mustard seed to represent the ministry of Jesus. Equally so, Moses quoted Christ as follows. And God spake unto Moses and said unto him, I am the Lord, and I appeared unto Abraham and unto Isaac and unto Jacob by the name of God Almighty. But by my name, Jehovah, was I not known to them. Exodus chapter 6, verses 2 and 3. That's part of the dew that has evaporated. Nobody takes recognition of that statement by Christ. Also, Moses published Christ's righteousness. This is uppermost in considerations. And this is why Revelation 15 says, and I quote, and them that hath gotten victory over the beast, and over his image, and over his mark, and over the number of his name, stand on the sea of glass, having the harps of God. And they sang the song of Moses, the servant of God, and the song of the Lamb, saying, great and marvelous are thy works, Lord God Almighty, just and true are thy ways, thou King of saints. Revelation chapter 15, verses 2 and 3, signifying that they give recognition, finally, about the identity of Christ. Virtually all of Christendom are tone deaf to the words of this song. They wrongly assume that Christ is the same as Jesus, and that the austerity and punitive exactitude exercised by him on Israel represents the whimsical vagaries of God, the Father, whom they think to be a merciless God of the Old Testament, one who requires Jesus to soften his austerity. To the contrary, I tell you, Christ, not Father nor Jesus, was the God of the Old Testament. His punishment of Israel and the nations will tell us, in the day that this song is harped to our ears, that Christ was loving and gracious as he sought to honor Father's desire to make man in their own image. He aborted life as the only means to grow the world to glory, when more than 8 billion saints did prevail today. And this number prevails even before the saints to soon be resurrected. By this he was given 6 days of creation to afford to earth her Sabbath rest. When this we learn, we will not assume that Jacob's sons had any righteousness by their names, their identity, and that God's severity was a reflection of Israel's perversity. They treacherously united with Masonry to defy Christ's mercy. Ergo does David declare that they sacrificed their own children to the devils of Canaan. The Song of Moses is speaking of Christ when, to repeat a snippet again, he says, he is the rock. His work is perfect, for all his ways are judgment, a God of truth and without iniquity. Just and right is he. They have corrupted themselves. Their spot is not the spot of his children. They are a perverse and crooked generation. Close quote. He has witnesses in heaven and earth to attest to these facts. Then, upon Christ making his plea to the 144,000, and so doing through this ministry, while hiding his face from them, as pre-stipulated by the covenant of Deuteronomy 18, they will cherish the invisible revisitation of Christ hid on the prophet like unto Moses, and will see Jacob's new path of life for them, the path which reverses their 3,700 years of misery. Before this day, they had an old song, a somebody done somebody wrong song. Therefore the redeemed of the Lord shall return, and come with singing unto Zion, and everlasting joy shall be upon their heads. They shall obtain gladness and joy, and sorrow and mourning shall flee away. Isaiah 51, verse 11. This shows Israel's new song. With it, we can anticipate our next meeting to more deeply examine the 144,000 in Israel as we bring this study, 49.1, to its close.